Good morning, everyone. We have attendees joining. We're expecting over 150 participants this morning in the Retail Hot Topics event. So at the moment, we're on 36, so we'll just give it a minute or two for everyone to join, and then we will run through the agenda and the plan for this morning. So thank you, everyone that has joined us. We'll just give it a few more minutes just to allow everyone to join. Okay, so Jamie, I think we can begin. The numbers have normalized. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. Um, it's we've got an action-packed agenda. Start off with a break the ice poll. So this retail hot topic session is going to be run slightly differently. We've aimed to make it highly interactive. So throughout the session, we are going to have some live polls, which we're going to ask you, the audience, to participate in. This will enable us to understand some insight from our audience in terms of some of the subject matter that we're talking this morning to, and every one of our presenters will interpret those results and overlay them to what they see in the retail sector. So quick introduction from myself, Jason Gottschalk. I am a partner in BDO's digital practice with a focus on cybersecurity in the retail sector. So I'll be your host this morning, and thank you to everyone that has joined us. So first up, we're going to have Sophie Michael, who's going to talk about the high street tracker sales, which is going to be action packed with lots of information, followed by Tom Holt on consumer sentiment with a number of polls there. Neil Stockham talking about the budget predictions for retail, and we had some pre-chat while we were planning this morning, and there's lots of good insight there. So Neil's pulled out his crystal ball, so let's see what happens. And then Siobhan Waters on the national minimum wage. So lots of interesting things, and then we'll close off with some Q&A from the attendees to the panel, and hopefully we can make this an action-packed session. I do encourage, besides the polls, please, ask questions, and we will try and make this as interactive as possible. So without further ado, and before I hand over to Sophie, I'm going to ask Caroline just to start off with the first icebreaker. Audience, the polls are anonymous, and if you wouldn't mind answering, and we will share all the answers with you as takeaways as we proceed. So the first question is, what event did Amazon host this week? I'm probably going to go with the Taylor Swift day, but that's just me. Caroline, when you've got some answers, if you can pop them up on the screen, that would be appreciated. Smart audience. So the answer is Prime Day. So 88% of you got that right. So that's brilliant. I'm going to ask Caroline just to go to icebreaker number 2. Did you participate in Amazon Prime Day? Caroline, when you're ready for the answers on that. Wow, 72% said no. Interesting. Okay, that's good. And we'll go with icebreaker number 3. Caroline, if you want to pop the answers up. Very interesting. So fantastic. So thank you very much. Before I hand over to Sophie, just to reiterate, we will be running polls throughout the session to try and make it interactive. Please, audience, if you have questions, please pop them in the chat, and we can answer them as we go through the presentation, and we will share the results of the poll. So, Sophie, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about the results of the High Street Sales Tracker. And just as a reminder, what this represents, it's a discretionary spend tracker, like-for-like sales. And the 3 categories that we looked at is homeware, fashion, and lifestyle. And we look at this across online, in-store, and a total tracker. Next slide, please. So what this really reflects, these graphs, is the huge amount of volatility that we've seen in consumer spending. And it's huge volatility right across the year, but also when we've seen a positive result, it's really been driven by events or heavy discounting. So it's interesting to see those results that we just saw on Prime Day and how it drives consumer spending. What we particularly saw over the past year, though, is that the in-store tracker, the spend in-store, is the one that has been the weakest, and that's that blue line there. And perhaps that's because it's been against stronger benchmarks of last year as people continue to go in store and spend. But also it just shows the sort of low consumer confidence and that people are not parting with their cash. Now, it's been a poor summer for retail, and the results have been a concern. And we saw this uplift in September, but whilst it was the first positive that we saw since November 23 for in-store, and actually we saw a big uplift in online, we've seen this reports that we've seen out there of significant discounting, and retailers have been stuck with some poor results over the summer, high stock levels, and really this heavy discounting which took place in September, which is one, driving necessary cash flow, but also clearing that inventory in time for the golden quarter that we're now in. So it is a concerning set of results. Yes, it's a positive result for September, but it is concerning as we've entered into this golden quarter. Next slide, please. This shows it by category. And actually, what we really saw again was that the biggest uplift in September was fashion, which also supports that line that fashion retailers will inevitably be looking to move that stock, which hasn't shifted over the summer, because styles don't remain still, as they go into filling their stores and their online platforms with inventory for the festive season. Homeware in particular has also been hit significantly, and that's, as we know, with consumer confidence has been low, and people do not shop on big ticket items as that consumer confidence drops. So the bigger ticket items have been more significantly hit, and lifestyle perhaps has performed a little bit better as people have treated themselves to some smaller gifts. But we also know that the discretionary spend categories have been impacted by fierce competition, as people have, with their tighter purse, have probably looked to holidays, to entertainment and experiences, as opposed to spending their funds on things. Next slide, please. And this shows the week by week high street sales tracker. And actually, when you look at September, it was the middle 2 weeks that really impacted the overall result for September. And those are the 2 weeks that we've also heard that the significant discounting took place. So again, it's interesting to see how those promotions, such as Amazon Prime, really impact the consumer. And we're going to see this continue. It's going to take a very brave retailer not to participate in the discounting that we know plays so heavily in November. And now we even have it brought forward. We've got Singles Day on the 11th of November. We have Black Friday and then Cyber Monday. I would love it that, we called a ban on all discounting before Christmas to give retailers the opportunity to sell at full price. But consumer confidence is low. I think it's going to be, it's going to need incentives in order to get the consumer to part with their cash in this golden quarter. And as I say, I think it's going to take a brave retailer not to participate in this discounting period. So I'm going to leave it there. And I think, sorry, next slide, please. Just as a reminder of what the High Street Sales Tracker does provide, if you're not subscribed and you are retailing the discretionary spend categories, please do subscribe. It's free to subscribe. You get a lot more detail than the readers of the tracker get. And if you want further details, please let us know. I'm going to pass over to Tom.
Thank you, Sophie, and morning, everyone. We always try and bring a nice positive spin to our lovely sector. And as Sophie mentioned in there, was some highlights, I think, during that High Street Sales Tracker. If we move on to the next slide. When it comes to sentiment, it has been a challenge. You can see a number of polls or industry measures that highlight that consumer confidence has been weak since the summer. And there is a general perspective that consumers are potentially reining back spend and trying to fathom what might the budget implications be on their purse. And for that reason, I think it has been a fairly muted period. What we do in our sentiment tracker, just covering the next slide, is we track a number of spend areas, both in leisure and hospitality, but also within retail. So the core categories of discretionary spend, very much similar to how we track the high street sales. So we can see, have there been movements in certain categories that would interest certain retailers, but also give us a view as to how the consumer is feeling. And we track all of these individually, but also holistically, how people are thinking about their retail spend in the coming months. I think we'll start, if we turn over the page, with a question to see how our audience and the retailers that are on the call think consumer sentiment is. So the question we've put here is, do we think consumer sentiment on spending is up or down from this time last year, which is how we measure, not quarter on quarter, we sometimes do, but this time last year, do we think consumer sentiment on spending is up or down? Caroline, can you pop the poll up? Thank you. So once we've got results, Caroline, if you put them up. A very even spread, and that in a way highlights how difficult it is to read how the consumer is feeling. And it does really differ either what retailer you are in terms of category or who you might be targeting in terms of consumer. If we close the poll and just move on one, we can indicate how we measure this and what our consumer poll of 1,000 nationally representative people says. And you can see here that there is very much a kind of softening on discretionary spend rates. And this is, again, thinking year on year down. What this highlights, though, is people are fairly neutral about their spend. They aren't indicating that this is going to go up. They're just fairly neutral. But when we track that year on year, it has seemed to fall down. And we have, prior to this, seen probably 3 quarters where that year on year view is improving. And this is the first notable decline that we've seen in our tracker. Now, let's try and dig into a little bit as to why. If we move on one slide, that covers a broad range of sectors. And this next question, we are putting up those categories. And it would be great if you could highlight which sectors do you think consumers are more positive about, and maybe select your top 3 that you think are the positive sectors consumers are positive about. As people are doing that, I think just going back to that Amazon poll, one thing that popped up for me really is whilst lots of retailers and Amazon with its massive presence is trying to drive people to occasions they have historically done successfully out of Black Friday, there is possibly a trend where there isn't as much participation in some of these days. And interestingly, I think that Amazon Prime Day, from my perspective, may have passed a lot of people by. There would have been some people who definitely took that as an opportunity for early Christmas shopping, and we've seen that in some of the results that we've seen separately. So interestingly, coming out here, we are very closely aligned on some of these. So travel, definitely something that we've seen as being a very positive trend over the last few months and most of the year. Beauty and personal care, a category which very much holds up and does well. And interestingly, to see there things like pet and child and baby, which are almost non-discretionary, less favorable than some of the others. If we close the poll and look to our tracker, I'll go through some of the detail that we've seen. Next slide, Jamie. Thank you. So on the left-hand side, you've got the categories. The first column highlights the net spend intention that we tracked this time last year. And then the answers for this time round. So you can see, and then, sorry, in the final column on the right is that movement year on year. Now, for most of these categories, there has been a decline, as indicated, obviously, by that high level decline of sentiment, by people saying, actually, we are a little bit more cautious here. Very interestingly, apparel is one of the notable year on year increases. So that is a net sentiment, net positive 7%. Indicating that that's fairly strong. Overall, travel hasn't moved and is probably the strongest at plus 13. But a number of these categories, people are indicating over the next 6 months they are less positive, and spend intention has declined year on year. Now, the last lens we're going to look at, one further slide on, is what's going on with the demographics here. And one thing I think would be interesting to get people's views on is which age groups do you think are most positive? If we can put that poll up, Caroline. Again, I think this is a really interesting time to have pulsed this consumer base because of some of the macro trends that would have been starting to become more favorable on discretionary income, with settling of inflation, a first basis point cut in interest rates, and some positive news. Now, this poll is obviously after the change in government, where there is naturally a pause or a kind of hiatus in terms of what consumers are thinking, especially with the October budget coming up. And if we can see the results, Caroline, it's a very even spread. And when we actually close this poll and go one slide on, Jamie, you'll see really that it is that younger consumer who is significantly more positive, and probably one of the only age groups that's actually more positive year on year. So on the left-hand side here, you've got this question broken down by age, and you can see that 18 to 24-year-olds are even more positive than they were last year. And that is really holding up some of these sentiments kind of scores. Every other category, so 25 to 34, has improved somewhat. Every other category, age category is negative and or has declined year on year. And when we look at this by income, it's a really interesting trend. So the higher income deciles or quintiles that have been driving consumer sentiment or the positive noise in confidence has softened somewhat. But actually in the lower incomes, people are indicating a slightly more positive picture. So you can see in those first 3 quintiles that actually there's been a net improvement. And for those in the income brackets 25 to 30K, 35K, that's actually positive for the first time that we've seen in a number of months. So lots of really interesting data, and how this plays into, I think, retail is younger consumers, certainly in categories like healthcare, beauty, very positive. The slightly more challenged end would be on the big ticket items, certainly for people who are probably in those middle income brackets. It is a challenge. But there are some signs here that actually there are some positive categories and segments in consumer that might point to a positive next 3 months as we go towards Christmas. If we move on, Jamie, I'll pass over to Neil.
Thank you, Tom. Right, it's time for me to gaze into my crystal ball and see what Rachel Reeves has got on her agenda. So if we just move on one slide, thanks, Jamie. I think it's been well trailed. Most of you will have seen that Labour have definitely made no bones about there's a big black hole, something of the order of 22 billion that they need to fill up. And that 22 billion, based on what I've read, seems to be the public sector overspend for the last 12 months. So it looks likely that Rachel Reeves and the Labour government are going to actually need a bit more headroom on top of that. So I think the big expectation is, unfortunately, tax rates are going to rise over the current period. And given everything that both Tom and Sophie have said, it is a very difficult balancing act I think she's got to pull off to maintain consumer confidence as best she can, but at the same time bolstering the coffers to hopefully stimulate growth. So I'm going to start off with a poll question to get your views on what measures you would like to see introduced in the budget to stimulate growth, because I think that is the only way over a long period of time we're actually going to get back on an even keel. So Caroline, if you could call up that poll, that would be great. We've got some results, Caroline, that would be great.
Give me a wee second, please.
Yeah, no problem.
Still some more movement here.
Ooh, exciting. Okay. Unsurprisingly, given the audience, reform of business rates, top of the agenda. I think we'd all like to see reduction in headline tax rates, but given what the government has announced in terms of holding steady the main tax rates for business and individuals, I think that's unlikely this time round. Maybe there'll be something in the business roadmap. And we'll see about the others as we go through. So if we move on to the next slide, please, Jamie. I'll try and give you a summary of what we think is likely to come up. And I've put these in 3 different areas. First one being growth, second one, which we'll come to in a minute, for business, and then third one for individuals. I think on the growth side, the government has said they're definitely going to introduce what they call a business tax roadmap. I think retailers and businesses across the board have a definite need for certainty. If they've got certainty, they're more likely to invest. Investment breeds growth. I think we would expect to see in that roadmap confirmation of the headline corporate tax rate, certainly remaining at 25% for the life of this Parliament. We would also expect things like the expensing of fixed asset investments relief to be confirmed in that. Hopefully, there will be a clear plan for all the main taxes and a roadmap that people can subscribe to, so that they know what to expect, and more importantly, when to expect it. And I hope, certainly for this audience, that as part of that roadmap, there's something in there about a reform to business rates, and I'll pick that up in a bit. We know that the government has been talking about reforms to the apprenticeship levy, and some of the numbers here are quite astonishing. So the levy itself raises about 4 billion annually, so it's a big revenue raiser, and about 25% of that is accessed by businesses that pay the levy. The rest gets spread out to devolved authorities and education institutions. And of that 4 billion, approximately a third of it comes from the retail sector. Excuse me. So a bit like business rates, because retailers are people-heavy businesses, they are paying more than their fair share into the pot, and more importantly, not getting access to that. So the government has announced that they are going to introduce what they call a growth and skills levy. We're expecting to see a some proposed guidance on that, which is almost certainly going to go to consultation, but hopefully it will be better designed and give businesses better access to invest in their people and actually do something with the money that they put into the pot. On planning reforms, we're expecting quite a lot of announcements here. I think this is what the government are pinning their hopes on in terms of quicker development of infrastructure. And they're hoping that if they can push things through quicker and in a more streamlined manner, that increased development spend will stimulate growth in other areas of the economy and hopefully boost productivity as well. We are expecting some announcements about what the government is going to do with the Treasury and in particular HMRC. They've said that they are going to introduce a digital transformation roadmap for HMRC. In my view, that's not before time. They've also said they are going to introduce earmark, I think it's something like $500 million to encourage the employment of, I think, about 5,000 more inspectors. So not particularly good news for the people on this call, because it probably means there's going to be an increased level of inquiries over the life of the Parliament as that employment embeds. Other stuff in orange on the screen, not directly impacting retailers, but there will be some indirect consequences that just need to be thought through. So the government is expected to announce an update on what they're going to do with the National Wealth Fund, the key target areas, the expected return on investment, and what growth they're looking for around that. There's going to be a roadmap and a rollout timetable for 5G and hyperfast broadband across the country, which I think will be welcome to all of us if they can make that work. And then alongside the business roadmap, they're also going to introduce what they call an industrial strategy, a long-term industrial strategy, basically giving some insight as to what support they're going to provide to high growth sectors. We expect these are going to be green energy, fintech, telecoms, and AI in the early stages. But again, we might see something for retail and consumer markets around business rates, digital sales, etc., over the coming years as that evolves. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide, please. And looking at it through just the lens of business, you guys on the call have highlighted business rates reform. Again, the numbers here are staggering. So retail as a whole pays 21% of the business rates burden, which equates to around about 33 billion. And that in aggregate is about 1.5 times the share of its share of the economy. So there's definitely a fundamental imbalance there, and it requires some serious reform. The Labour government, like the last Conservative government, have said that they will reform business rates. Whether that happens, whether we can get to what the British Retail Consortium have been lobbying for, which is a 20% rates corrector to reflect the overburden for the sector, remains to be seen. I think it's probably unlikely, but hopefully there will be help for retailers through that reform process and a reduction in the burden going forward. Capital allowances and corporation tax, I've mentioned those already. We expect those to all be confirmed in the budget later this month. Minimum wage, there will be an increase and continual increase over the coming years, and I'm going to talk to Siobhan about that once I've been through these slides. And as of today, there has been an announcement that Labour will be introducing their employment rights bill. We haven't had a chance to go through the detail there, but there will be implications for retailers. And when we've had a chance to go through that, we will obviously share our thoughts and comments. We don't expect that to bite until 2026 at the earliest, and there will be a period of consultation on the rights changes so that businesses can get their head around what the impact is going to be. And we have to watch this space and see how it evolves. National insurance, we are not expecting any changes for employees' national insurance. That's been ruled out. But I think there is an outside chance for employers' NIC, particularly around pensions contributions. We could see some changes there. And then the final two, businesses, not directly related to the retail sector, but we are expecting some changes around the fuel duty escalator. Obviously, it's either been frozen or reduced over the last 10 years by successive governments. We can probably see a comeback of that, but it will depend on the price of oil and likely price of oil over the short, medium term. We know that the Labour government will be introducing levies or supplements to corporate tax, not only for banks, but also for businesses in the oil and gas sector through windfall taxes. And again, that will have an indirect consequence for retailers, because I can't believe that not all of that will be passed on to both businesses and consumers. And if we move on one more, let's have a look at owners and employees. Obviously, the big headlines over the past few months have been around capital gains tax. I think there will be some changes there. My view is I think the rate will go up. The big question is when it goes up. I think, will it be from budget day, or will it be for some at some point in the future, maybe the 5th of April next year? What I can tell you is all the scaremongering over the last few months has accelerated the CG tax take for the Treasury already. I think something to the tune of £4 billion. So it may be that they carry on playing that game for some time, not confirming, not denying that there's going to be a change in rates, to see if they can continue to accelerate that tax take. If the rates do go up, I am expecting also to see some changes to reliefs. And I think the principal ones that will come under the lens are business asset disposal relief, which is the relief that currently gets you to a 10% effective corporate capital gains tax rate. I can see that being tweaked and refined so that we might get a lower rate for long-term capital gains assets that you've held for 5-10 years, but a higher rate for assets that you've held over a short term. And I think there might be some capping on principal private residence relief, maybe a top end value 2 or 5 million, something like that. On inheritance tax, I think most of the talk has been around the interaction of inheritance tax with pension pots that transfer on death. I can see those coming into the IHT net. I think it will be it's an easy win for the government in terms of tax take, and probably at the least controversial end. Clearly, it's not a good situation, but it's probably one that they can get through. And there'll probably be, again, a bit like capital gains tax, some changes to reliefs. Whether AIM shares will fall out of the business property relief arrangements, don't know at this stage, but we'll have to watch this space carefully to see what the impact is. Pensions are definitely under the lens, and it could be anything from changes to annual allowances, the lifetime allowances, how much tax-free cash you can take out of a pension pot at the beginning, or capping of income tax rates, income tax rate relief for contributions into your pension scheme. My view is I think it's more likely to be something around the tax-free cash, maybe a cap on the limit, and probably a cap on the income tax relief that is going to come in at some point over the life of the Parliament. Non-DOMs, we definitely know they're under the lens. There will be changes there. I think they will build on what the Conservatives proposed in their final budget. It looks likely, based on the press coverage that I've seen this week, that the IHT pots and bringing those into the tax net for non-DOMs are likely to be scaled back. And they've also ruled out an exit charge, so charging capital gains tax for non-DOMs leaving the UK, going to a lower tax jurisdiction. They've said they're not going to apply those, at least at the minute. And then the big one will be private equity carried interests. There's a linkage here with what the government does with capital gains tax rates. So will it move from being taxed at 28% to some higher rate? Or will there also be much more stringent rules to enable you to get capital treatment? I think they're the two key variables. And I think it's unlikely that it will all be taxed at income tax rates. I think there will be some element of capital treatment in there, but it remains to be seen whether that is higher than 28% or left as it is. The good news is there won't be a wealth tax. So that is my crystal ball summary. I think, Caroline, we've got one final poll, which we could. So based on what you've heard and what you have read, what measures do you think are most likely to be introduced in the autumn budget? And Caroline, if you can call up the poll. And what I'd like you to do is pick your top 3 here, please. Yeah, so CGT, less positive about business rates reform coming through, IHT and pension changes. So maybe I was too leading there, very, very closely aligned to our views as well. Okay, thank you for that. We're now going to have a chat. If I can ask Siobhan to join me. Siobhan, welcome. Thank you. So national minimum wage, one of the announcements we're expecting to see in the budget. Have you got any indication of what the rates will be from April next year?
Yeah, so the government have given the Low Pay Commission, so they're the independent body who consult and inform government on the expected rates of pay. They gave them a new remit this year for the first time to include the cost of living and to consider if they were moving towards a single adult rate, so doing away with the age bands. The report that they have released since being given that remit has a central estimate of about £12.10. So that's about a 66 pence difference in the current rate just now. There is moves from Labour to do away with those age bands. We do not have confirmation that that would happen in April 2025 if it was to be done, so it would be announced in the budget. We do feel that it's more likely to be April 2026. However, fitting in with all the ethos of the Employment Rights Bill, it does feel like it is not out with the realms of possibility that would be an announcement. We do know that they want to kind of bridge that gap. So even if they don't announce a single adult rate for April 2025, we would be likely to see a jump in the current rate for the 18 to 20 age group as well, so that there would be a lesser gap between the two of them just now. And you know, quick summary on what that £12.10 looks like.
Yeah.
66 pence an hour for an average full-time worker. It's about 1,200 and so many pounds and pence over the year. So when you extrapolate that over your business, it's still quite a significant increase as well.
Yeah.
A lot for businesses to think about. The £12.10 is not static, it can move. They do try and keep it 2/3 of median earnings. And this year there's been such growth in earnings that they want to make sure that it still aligns with that. So they could see that going a few pence higher as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And you're absolutely right, Siobhan. Yeah, you look at it through one lens and you say 66 pence per individual per hour. But with very people-heavy businesses like retailers have got, it soon mounts up and it is a big cost. So Jamie, if we can move on to the next slide, I'll then ask Siobhan the next question. So we know rates are going to go up, Siobhan, not only in the short term, but probably in the medium term as well. What do you think are the key things that employers should be thinking about ahead of the rate increases?
Yeah, I get quite a lot of response to questions I ask, saying, well, you know, minimum wage is just about the rate of pay. As long as I'm paying that rate of pay, then I'm absolutely fine. To the other end of the scale, where people have said, I didn't realise that that had an impact on minimum wage. And I think what is becoming more and more prevalent through conversations I have with our clients is the minimum wage increases over the last few years have been so significant that it's very small gaps between some of your more experienced, more skilled workers, supervisor roles, those that go above. There is not the same affordability to give them the same percentage increase on their annual pay award. So we are starting to see a lot more employers and businesses look at that overall reward picture. So they are looking at introducing things that give, you know, something back to their workers that's not just necessarily on the wage slip. Things that will give them a benefit through salary sacrifice is certainly becoming more and more popular for lots of different things. You can get electronic goods, you've got your standard, you know, pensions, salary sacrifice, and for those higher up the scale as well, you might have cars and other items of higher value. The problem that I see with that is even those that are not paid the minimum wage rate, so someone on a much higher salary sacrifice and a higher percentage into their pension, then getting a car on top of that, the cumulative impact on that as the minimum wage rate increases throughout the lifespan of their arrangement means that they can become very closely near what those rates will be. And that's quite often an oversight that employers have. Someone's entered into an agreement for 3 years and the rates have went up each year. They've not checked back to make sure that's okay. A lot of employers say their payroll software will pick that up, but sometimes that's not always the case. Reliance on payroll software doesn't always help because there's so many things. I've put a couple of examples on here, which, you know, people can't pick up through payroll. So something I have worked recently with a retail client on, and something HMRC have really enforced in the past is working time. What is working time? You're contracted on the rota from 9 till 5, but your employer needs you to come in 15 minutes early to set up, 15 minutes early to get changed into a uniform, and the same at the close of your shift as well. So effectively that could be half an hour every day for every worker that HMRC and the legislation would determine would be unpaid. And that's again something that we are really trying to encourage employers in advance of the wage increase coming in April to really look at a proactive approach of where they're currently at. And in doing so, yeah, this business did find that their increase to cover, you know, costs that they want to make sure that they're covering all time with no risk for a worker to assume that they're not getting paid for everything, to be, you know, they don't want a worker complaint to HMRC. The cost of that for them, they're more than happy to bear. They don't want any repercussions from that. But the cost if HMRC picked that up would have been 200% of underpayments going back 6 years. So again, it would have been very costly, and then they would have been named in the public naming and shaming as well. So being proactive might cost you money to do so and put things in a different perspective going forward. But to avoid those penalties, public name and reputational damage can be quite a big thing in the retail sector to make sure you're avoiding.
Yeah. And then final question for you, and I'm conscious of time and going back to Jason. So just very quickly on this. So we touched on employment rights in the sort of budget predictions. The rates are going to go up. You've said it's complex already. What are some of the other interactions and some of the other things that retailers should be thinking about to make sure, because compliance here with national minimum wage is not just the rate, is it? It's
No,
a lot more than that.
Yeah. So you'll all know as retailers, there's been, recent high profile case around equal pay, and currently we have, an allowance within NMW that different pay rates can be paid for different ages without being an equal pay issue. But the wider impact of equal pay certainly should be on employers' radar for going forward as well. We mentioned apprenticeship levy changes. If the wage increases mean your business is now potentially going to go over the current threshold, or the changes, that needs to be considered as well. And holiday pay is really starting to be something I'm having a lot more conversations about. There was changes on that, and a lot of employers have still not really got their heads around what the impact of that is as well. With the new employment rights bill, there is a move to take national minimum wage and other government departments into a fair work department, and holiday pay would come under part of that. So definitely holiday pay should be on people's radar well ahead of any of that happening in the future.
Great stuff. Thank you, Siobhan. And Jason, I think back to you.
Thanks, Neil. If I could ask all the presenters just to pop on their cameras, we've got some quick Q&A and then a wrap up. I've got a few questions which have come through. Only 3 questions, so it's not won't keep the attendees too long on the call. But Tom, maybe I'll start off with you on this question. In terms of consumer sentiment and the positiveness amongst the younger generation, what do you think is driving this?
Yeah, I think we do get a little bit more detail when we ask these kind of questions. And there's a couple of things. One, naturally, some of the macro trends that have impacted those, I'd say, income and age deciles have now abated. So there isn't as much headwinds facing those consumer groups. Secondly, there is always a natural, more positive measure that we do have from that age group. And the last thing I think is that as we've seen, I guess, some of the sentiment soften in some other age categories and actually spend categories, there has been probably a number of months where that age group has been fairly muted and is now starting to actually see that there is light at the end of the tunnel and spend. So I would have thought that they face, I think, less headwinds than others. And it's more the counter, which is that the other age groups, there's still, for the relatively still small percentage, but in that middle age groups that have mortgages, there are still rates that are impacting them and mortgages that come off. And in the higher income brackets and older age groups, I think the budget and the period of time looking to that budget do have, concerns, cautions on some of that spend. And until that, you won't really see any changes in my mind.
Brilliant, thanks, Tom. Neil, there are 2 questions that have come through for you, but I'll just do the one. And apologies, it's quite a long one, but I think it's quite a good question. So I'm going to ask you just to pull out your crystal ball again. I think ultimately it's a question around the competitiveness of the UK and the UK economy and the ability of government to balance the books, so to speak, and have a competitive tax regime. Are we reaching the point where it's becoming difficult to balance the books and have a competitive tax or a tax regime that promotes competitiveness?
I think the short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is that there's a number of levers that need to be balanced both through the budget and probably the lifetime of this Parliament and beyond. I think the headline tax rate going up to 25% for businesses has clearly been a red flag to some extent for inward investment. So, personally, I would like to see that come down as soon as it's possible to do so, because I think that would be much more attractive for inbound investment. I also think that given the number of changes in government that we've had in the recent past, there's been lots of sticking plasters that have been applied. Legislation is overwhelmingly complex. We've seen that through the brief discussion I had with Siobhan this morning. And I think actually, if you want stability and a clear roadmap for the future that gives businesses certainty, which is what's going to drive investment and what's going to drive growth, then actually simplifying the legislation and making it clear what's going to happen when and what businesses can and can't do has got to be a big stepping stone towards that goal.
Fantastic, brilliant. And then Sophie, one for you, and possibly bringing us a specific component of the sector into view, the luxury goods sector. VAT-free shopping question is simply, do you think the government should revisit the VAT-free shopping or tax-free shopping to promote that sector, that subsector, so to speak? Thoughts?
Absolutely. You know, we're faced with tough competition and we want people to come here and shop. And it's just made our UK landscape uncompetitive in that respect. So, you know, it both attracts tourism to other destinations where they can take the benefit of tax-free shopping. And at the same time, our retailers are struggling as a result. So absolutely, this is one that the government should definitely address, and would be welcome, I'm sure, because ultimately it just means that people will buy more in the UK.
Neil, probability of the government revisiting that in this round?
Well, there's been
on the spot.
I would say less than 25%, unfortunately. I'd much I like Sophie, I definitely want to see it on the radar. The BRC is continuing to lobby for that, and I think it's the right thing to do. And for us to be out of kilter with our European neighbours just doesn't seem to be the right thing to do. So yeah, the sooner it's addressed, the better.
We'll wait and see whether your crystal ball is accurate or not. Panelists, thank you very much for your time. Attendees, thank you very much. We are finishing 2 minutes ahead of, or 1 minute ahead of schedule. That gives everyone time to go grab a cup of tea or coffee for the next meetings. We will share the results of the polls and share the slide pack. So thank you everyone for attending, and it's almost the weekend. Thank you very much.
So